So let's look at some more of our process here of making wine. You have wine which symbolizes, it's not the same thing as it being that, but it symbolizes sacred truth. That water is the truth, but when you have lived the truth, it becomes sacred truth. So wine is a symbol for truth that's lived from a love for goodness. So when we do something that's true, that's good and true because we want to, that's what makes the wine sacred, that symbolism. This comes about when we go through the process of spiritual fermentation. So that is the change in the liquid. And Swedenborg comments on it further in True Christianity 571. This is, again, talking about these two states. There are two states we all inevitably enter into and go through if we are to turn from an earthly person into a spiritual person. The first is a state of thought that occurs in the intellect, and that is our primary fermentation stage. That's when we are just doing things because we heard it's the right thing to do. The second state is a state of love that occurs in our will. As the second state begins and progresses, a change takes place in our minds. There is a reversal or turning point because then the love in our will flows into our intellect and leads and drives it to think in agreement and in harmony with what we love. As good action, and that's the second process there. That's the second half. That's the fermentation where this alcohol is beginning to be produced. We're becoming a new liquid. As good actions that come from love take on a primary role and the truths related to faith are relegated to a secondary role, we become spiritual and are a new creation. Then our actions come from goodwill and our words come from faith. We develop a sense of the goodness that comes from goodwill and a perception of the truth that is related to faith. We are in the Lord and in a state of peace. Doesn't sound so bad. In brief, we are reborn. That's the process. We have this new will that's leading us to feel things differently and think differently, and that is symbolized by this transition of liquid. But it's not even just the liquid changing. Every part of the fermentation process represents something spiritual in us. We've had some discussion by Swedenborg about the dregs, which is this stuff that falls off during the process. The yeast eats the glucose, which creates alcohol and actually kills the yeast, and the yeast settles. Like evil and falsity get pushed out in us when the alcohol, which symbolizes love, makes an environment in us that's inhospitable to evil and falsity. So there's a physical analog. The alcohol kills the yeast settle. In us, what's happening is described in this video of Divine Providence 79.
We say that whatever we do freely and in keeping with our thought is permanent, because nothing we make part of ourselves can be eliminated. It has become part of both our love and our reasoning, part of both our volition and our discernment, that is, and therefore part of our life. Actually, it can be displaced, but it still cannot be ousted. When it is displaced, it is moved from the center to the periphery, and there it dwells. This is what being permanent means. For example, suppose that in youth and early maturity, we have taken into ourselves a pattern of doing something wrong because of the pleasure it gives to our love. Cheating, perhaps, or blasphemy, or revenge, or promiscuity. Since we have done so freely, in keeping with our thought, we have made this part of ourselves. Later, though, if we repent, turn away from this behavior and regard it as sin that is to be rejected, and therefore refrain from it freely and rationally, then we make part of ourselves the good behavior that is opposite to the evil. This good behavior then takes its place in the center and moves the evil toward the periphery, farther and farther out, depending on our distaste for and rejection of it. The evil still cannot be ousted to the point of being uprooted, even though it may seem to be so. What is happening is that the Lord is restraining us from the evil behavior and keeping us in the good. This is what happens with all the evil we inherit and with all the evil we act out.
So that evil is pushed out to the side and sits there kind of at the bottom of our what I was gonna say barrel, but it's actually a jar in this case. This is the dregs, and it settles down there when you're making it. So that is actually a symbol of this process. That is a mirror of what happens in us. That's our evil at the bottom. That wine there is the good, loving part in us that's higher than the bottom.